I'm Jack Newton, CEO of Clio, and this is the Daily Matters podcast. On Daily Matters, we talk with legal professionals, industry leaders, and subject matter experts about the future of law. We explore where the legal industry is headed, how legal practice is changing, and what you can be doing to position yourself for success. Today's guests are Shreya and Colin Ley, who are the co-founders and lawyer humans at LayRoots, a law firm bringing a new approach to asset protection, estate planning, business, and intellectual property law. Shreya and Colin, it's great to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Ooh, we coordinated.
That was great. Yeah. That was very coordinated. Shreya and Colin, let's start off talking about what's going on in your backyard right now. You're in Seattle or near Seattle. There's obviously a lot going on in Seattle and Washington in general right now. Can you tell us a little bit what's going on the ground and how it's impacted you personally?
Sure. So there's coronavirus, which Seattle has been kind of a hotbed for coronavirus cases, and we've been somewhat on lockdown for 4 months now, about. And then there are obviously the protests and the occupied protest holding their ground in Capitol Hill, although I think they may have relinquished or
they're going to take it back, is what the news is saying today. So
yeah. Personally, we've joined in a couple of the protests. We've been monitoring what's happening around the city. We support a lot of the changes that people are proposing as far as police brutality and whatnot. But as far as the coronavirus, I don't know that much has impacted us personally on that front or business-wise yet.
I mean, we were ready for the changes that happened. I mean, this is kind of like what we had always wanted in a way. We were always telling people, it's like, we don't have to meet in person. We could meet by video. We could do a Zoom call. And, before, the response was often no, or what's Zoom? How do I get into Zoom? All these issues. And now it's like, oh yeah, Zoom. Like all of a sudden, all those issues have dropped off. Everyone's happy to meet by Zoom. And
we feel also that we are set up personally in a way that's great for self-isolation, because at the end of last year, right before the fall, I guess, of last year, we moved out kind of to the countryside from the city. And so now we have all this space and we're like, oh, this is kind of idyllic. We'll go on these like long walks in the country and have this flexibility. I personally love not having to commute. That's really great. And so yeah, there are things, we have cooking projects going on,
That's amazing. And let's talk a little bit about LayRoots, and I want to talk more about the future you anticipated, arriving a little bit early. But to start off and to provide our listeners some context, do you mind sharing your story with us? Tell us about how the two of you met and how you eventually created LayRoots together.
Sure. I think a lot of people would be surprised knowing us now to learn how we originally met, but we met on the Greek islands. We were doing a study abroad trip in law school in Rhodos, Greece, and Colin was drunk at the pool and I was just arriving for the study abroad trip, and he kind of made his way over to the side of the pool to introduce himself and broke some glass in the process, and that was how we met.
Sounds like a stylish entrance.
Yeah.
And then how we started the law firm is actually a bit disputed between the two of us. I maintain that I started the law firm alone and he was simply supporting me, and he maintains that we started it together at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there was there was a camping trip where we were talking about how she was unhappy with what she was doing. I said, oh, it'd be great if we started a firm together. And next thing you know, there we were.
This is the next Zuckerberg Winklevoss twins expose. We're looking forward to a book covering this controversy.
Yeah. I've been researching how to dilute his equity in our, LayRoots
So in that,
membership.
let's go with your version of the story, Shreya. When you came up with the idea for the firm, what were you looking to accomplish, and how did Colin help shape that vision?
To be perfectly honest, LayRoots would not be what it is today without Colin's contribution. My vision for the firm was simply that I was unhappy with what I was currently doing. I was unhappy with the way that a lot of law firms were treating their employees and lawyers. And I hated the billable hour. I thought there was a better way to do that. And so I wanted to start my own firm as a way to get away from like the traditional law firm and what that traditional law firm offers to its clients and employees, that interaction. I didn't feel like I fit. And many of the other aspects of the brand and the law firm wouldn't be what it is without our partnership, to be honest. Like the whole lawyer human concept, all of that came about after we joined forces.
Okay, so Colin, sounds like the story's softening a little bit here. It sounds like you did have an impact here. What drew you maybe to the idea? Tell me what led to this idea of lawyer humans. There's a lot to dig into here, but I think that's one interesting concept. Yeah. It's a term I at least hadn't heard prior to becoming aware of the work the two of you do. What's that mean to you?
So, it kind of started accidentally when I was creating new business cards, and I was going through the little template of what you put, and then we were getting to, occupation, title, whatever, I put lawyer, and to me, that didn't really feel like an identity, like lawyer, whatever. And so I tacked on
but
the lawyer.
Also inaccurate as owners of the business, right? Like just lawyer. And then managing partner didn't feel right either because we weren't managing anything at that point. We had just started the law firm.
Right.
And also it's so stuffy.
Yeah. So lawyer human ended up on the card, and it really ended up being a term that helped define that vision that Shreya was talking about.
Yeah.
So why human? It sounds like you got lawyer down, and then what were you trying to round out with the description of?
Yeah,
human?
I think lawyers often position themselves, at least at that time, I think it's softened in the years since we started the law firm, but as other, right? As on a pedestal, as behind this barrier. And so lawyers often position themselves as different from the humans that they interact with. And we took issue with that. One, we didn't want to hire an attorney like that. And so we figured other people out there wouldn't want to hire attorneys that seemed so distant from them and so not relatable. So there was that aspect of it. We wanted to make people feel comfortable calling us, but part of the reason that I didn't feel like I fit in big law is that I didn't want to divorce the human side of me and my personality from my practice of law. And so I think that is kind of where it came from, that, and I think we were listening often to that Killers song, Are We Human or Are We Dancer?
Yeah, great song.
So I think that played into it as well, coming up with the idea.
That kind of places your founding timeline in a bit of a time capsule. Now, I'm curious what your perspective is on why so many lawyers kind of have that almost persona or facade of being something other than human. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the responses I've heard from both lawyers and clients has been enlightening exactly on that front, where people talk about the fact that they're seeing a more human side of their lawyers, and that they actually really appreciate that, whether it's a kid wandering into a Zoom call or just feel like maybe indirectly you're being invited into their homes and seeing a glimpse of what their home life looks like through a Zoom call. And similarly, it feels like lawyers feel like they've got permission to let their guard down a little bit and be a bit more real. And this just feels like a great step forward in terms of making lawyers a bit more relatable and a bit more accessible. But I'm curious what your perspective on that trend is, if we can call that a trend, and maybe
Sure.
why you think the default, the status quo prior to COVID-19 was so different.
I don't know if you have something to say, but for me, I think there are several aspects to it. I think one, lawyers are often dealing with other people's emotions and problems. And so there might be some aspect to it where we don't want to take those emotions home with us necessarily, or, there's this idea of distancing ourselves from our clients a bit. But I think that there's also culturally in the legal profession this image of the lawyer as, the arbiter of justice and this third party unbiased opinion where we argue both sides and we have to see things from all different sides of the argument, and we can't have biases or opinions, when in reality we all have biases and opinions. And so I don't think it's possible to be that unbiased third party. But I think there's also an aspect to it where when we were in law school, both of us were not traditional law students, in that we'd been working and out in the real world prior to going to law school. And I think there are many attorneys who go straight through from college to law school to working in this law firm job. And they haven't necessarily experienced many of the things in their own life that their clients are going through. And so I think there's some facade that gets put up in that, as well as where we are afraid to admit maybe sometimes that we don't know certain things or we can't relate. And in that we also, and we're overcorrecting, right, by appearing to be more professional.
Like a compensation mechanism almost.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that kind of go into it, but there's definitely the culture of being this like unbiased third party. And then there's also this idea of like, well, I haven't experienced this and I can't admit that.
So what's that look like on the ground, so to speak? Can you tell us what being human looks like when you're actually interacting with the clients, and what this kind of deliberate choice to be a bit more real and a bit more authentic looks like?
I think one is telling our stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's being concerned with their feelings, objectives. Someone told us before that, clients, they don't have a legal problem, they have a personal problem that's exacerbated by a legal issue.
Right.
And so focusing on that side of thing, rather than just, here's this legal issue that I can solve and this is how I'll do it. I've done it for so long. Connecting more on their personal side and their emotions and what's happening in their lives. Seems like an easier way to do things for me.
And I think it's also because we do things, partially because we do things flat fee, we feel comfortable proactively reaching out to our clients oftentimes. Even just to check in and say, how are things going? Because we're not concerned about something being billable. And so I think that plays into it as well. We had a client once tell me that they had switched from our law firm to some other like big law firm because they were like a startup. They had decided to raise venture money and we were no longer the appropriate fit for them. And they said, what I see as the biggest difference between these two is that this other law firm really only reaches out to me if I owe them money.
Right.
And, or if there's like some specific like legal issue or paperwork that has come across their desk, they don't just reach out and ask us how we're doing and how our business is doing.
I find that so surprising. And as a business owner myself, I find that to be such a recurring pattern with so many of the lawyers I've used over the course of building Clio, even on a personal level. The first lawyer that helped me with my first will I never hear from them again once I'm done that one seemingly transactional bit of business. But you realize, my wills and estates lawyer, my life has changed over the last 20 years. Stay in touch, and there's probably some revisions that need to be done in my will. You talked about a startup. A startup is constantly evolving and changing, and has constantly evolving legal needs and demands, and just staying in touch and being, I think you phrased it well, Colin, like looking yourself as a solution provider to the various problems that startup will encounter is just maintaining a dialogue. And yet it seems like finding out about the problems that you can assist with is a matter of maintaining that dialogue. And yet so many firms seem to not do a great job of that really basic thing of just staying in touch.
Yeah. And it's not just people that are paying us money, right? I think it extends to other things as well. We recently had someone reach out to us that we couldn't help. They had an asset protection issue. We couldn't help them. But we reached out to a number of other attorneys we know to try and find them someone that can help them. And proactively reached out and said, here's what's happening. Can you actually help this person? Like the level, I think it surprises a lot of attorneys that we reach out to when we express a level of concern of, well, we don't just want to hand this person off to you and give them your information. Before we do that, we want to know if you can actually help them. Otherwise,
Right.
like this person is just going on this wild goose chase and nobody likes that.
Absolutely. And when you think about maybe extracting some of the learnings that you've had from building LayRoots, can you tell us, maybe a good place to draw from is at the 2019 Clio Cloud Conference, you gave an excellent and really well-received presentation on building a unique firm. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes your practice unique, some of the challenges you faced building your firm, and what some of the learnings that you might extract from building your firm and share out with our audience?
Sure. I think one of the challenges we faced when we first started was the reception from other attorneys. We received hate mail within our first year, probably, of having our law firm from another attorney who said that we were a disgrace to the practice of law because of, there was a the Northwest Lawyer magazine did just like a little back of the magazine profile on us, and the picture I had submitted was me with my snowboard, and we talked about being lawyer humans, and he felt compelled upon reading that to personally email me and tell me how much he hated us.
Wow.
So I think that was probably some of the challenges we faced. And also in our own growth and branding, we have made missteps. And I think that was part of what our Clio Cloud conference talk was about, is that we often overcorrected in one way or the other, either being too casual or too formal. We struggled with finding who our audience was. We tried a bunch of things before landing on what works for us. And I think that might be where a lot of new business owners in general, but lawyers being a slightly more conservative, struggle with, is the idea that you can try something and it not work out, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the iterations you went through, and maybe what some of the failures were, and how you eventually found an audience for your services? That process of what I like to describe as finding product market fit, right? Like you
Yeah.
kind of have to go through some iterations and evolve the product to find that product market fit. What did that journey look like for you?
Well, I know what we ended up with. The place we landed was to help people who had similar problems that we experienced as we were building a business and our life was changing. But to get there, Shreya started, through my suggestion, being an attorney for life coaches.
Oh, that was not a good fit for me.
Yeah, it was all business focused.
Yeah, online businesses, a lot of them, and then yeah, it just wasn't a good fit. Apparently, I didn't demonstrate the right the right gusto and vigor for the life coaching industry that I needed to. So
yeah, but it was yeah, mostly I think focused on different areas of law. A lot of times we thought about maybe doing a divorce practice because we
he did.
We met an attorney who was like, oh, I might retire soon and I can hand this off to you. And it's like, oh, well, this is a great idea.
Yeah, there was some shiny object syndrome with like different practice areas. There was also, so at first I think we corrected to being like too casual. So we were like, oh, we don't need to have a whole lot of formality. So we're going to be really casual attorneys. But we realized that the people that we were attracting were not the people that we could actually help with what we were providing. And so we got a feedback back from clients, potential clients, just that they did not like how casual we were. So
I'm curious what specifically, when they said too casual, were you able to put your finger on exactly what that was? It's a bit of an amorphous concept, but
I think it was in part casual approach to how we dressed and maybe how we spoke or interacted, met with clients. I think it was both of those things really that was mostly the focus, but a lot of it was focused around like how we dressed. And they were like, if we're going to be trusting you with this amount of money, then we expect our attorneys to be dressed professionally, sort of a thing. And it's not like we were, hanging out in our bathing suits or something, but they didn't want jeans and flannel shirt, essentially.
Right. Okay. And so some of those iterations, just in terms of how you're presenting yourself, were what helped you ultimately create that product market fit, and you started getting. Were you able to make other pivots in terms of finding that audience? And where did you? I'm wondering, did you find a moment where you found, okay, we're getting some traction here, let's double down on exactly what we're doing here and start to build, real audience?
Yeah, I think there were several points at which we could identify where that happened, right? One was with the Lawyer Human business card. We went to a conference and people started coming up to us that had received our business card and bringing others with them to say, these are the Lawyer Humans, these are the people I was telling you about. And so that getting that feedback from our potential clients and other people we were like, we should stick with this, we should build this out. So there was that point. And then we did this podcast. Well, we're still doing a podcast, but we started a podcast to try and find our voice. And we were recording 5-minute episodes every day. And the goal was to do it for an entire year. We didn't make it. But part of why we gave up on it was that we started feeling a little bit lost in our messaging and like nobody was listening and it wasn't doing anything. But what we realized coming out of it after reflection, after we quit, was that the thing that people really enjoyed about the podcast and in hearing from us and often brought up to us were that we're partners in life and business, that we're talking about building this business together and the different aspects of that. And so that helped us realize that maybe our audience is other people like us, that people seem to really enjoy and relate to that aspect of our story. So we should double down on that. And so I think there were several inflection points, I guess, throughout while we've been trying things, where when we receive that positive feedback and people seem to be relating to it, that we actually can help, then we sort of just try and double down on that. And sometimes it takes us a few months to realize that's what's happening, but we eventually get around to it.
And I'm curious, for you, Colin, was there something you look back on as an aha moment as well, or is it overlap significantly with Shreya's perspective of kind of how you built that product market fit, and if it felt like there was a tipping point in realizing that fit with your firm?
I mean, it certainly overlaps. I mean, there were those, those moments when we realized that talking about our story, there's other people that relate to that as well. But we've kind of, one of the big things I've thought about is some of our offerings. You know, we've offered things before that weren't in line with what our vision was, or, you know, what would be.
Yeah, you're way more like the product development kind of person as far as like creating our legal products.
Yeah, so we've been able to, there's been moments when we say, okay, we're just not going to do these types of cases anymore, or not work with these people that don't fit within that profile. So like an example of that would just be like, you know, the really cheap will package basic type thing. So we've instead focused on people that want to have, you know, more a private, speedy, easy estate plan, more trust-based. So we said, okay, anybody who's not looking for that, we have a great referral for you. We can send you to them, but we're going to focus on people who have this certain goal. And it's easy, you know, looking backwards to at revenue and clients we'd work with, to realize that we weren't really doing that many of those anyway. So it's the easier way to justify kind of leaving something on the side. Or
he's really good about like getting rid of things, like but you know, identifying things, like even in our personal life, like he'll be like, we don't use this thing, we should just like get rid of it. But in business as well, I feel like he does that, right? Like, well, where he'll say, we really hate doing the cheap will, and we should just stop doing it. And then we'll go back and we'll look at, well, okay, how much money have we actually made from doing these types of matters in the last 2 years? How many clients have reached out to us that want this sort of a thing? So we try and keep records of and data on that information, right? And say, these are how many matters we've opened. He recently did this actually with, so we were talking earlier about COVID-19 and changes, about giving up our office space. So he was like, looked through how many people in the last year did we actually meet in person and rent a conference room for,
right?
And how many of, like, how much of our revenue was devoted to that. And just looking through that and seeing like, actually only like, let's say 1 client per month comes in and meets us in person. Everybody else is happy with virtual meetings.
Right.
So so he's good about looking into those types of things, and that part of our brand and identity, I'd say.
Yeah, well, it's music to my ears. We talk a lot about, you know, both within Clio and you know, with law firms making data-driven decision making, and it can be such a powerful tool to, if you are making a trade-off decision, you might lose some clients, but is the upside in focusing your efforts worth giving something up? And sounds like you're the Mary Kondo of the law firm, and maybe the household too, Colin.
For sure. I definitely like to hold on to things a bit more than he does.
But I guess ultimately, especially, you know, when you're presenting yourself to the public and talking about your story, you need a focused message. You can't be everything to everyone. So it really does mean doubling down on what's working and then cutting the things that aren't, because it's not just sitting there doing nothing and doing no harm, as I think many people expect. It's actually confusing your message and confusing your audience.
Yeah, definitely. I think as a consumer, you want to know what you're going to get, instead of having no idea, like, well, can this lawyer help me or not? Like, I don't know. And so I think we've made a conscious effort, especially over the last 2 years, of continuing to narrow down our messaging on our website and in how we talk to people. The videos we do for the firm, I think, are pretty narrowly focused on a couple of different topics. So we've been making a conscious effort of also, and practicing what we preach, where when people call us and ask for something that's not in our wheelhouse, we refer them out, so that we can focus on the things that we actually want to build.
And I'm sure that ends up becoming a two-way street as well. When you're building that referral network, you're in turn building return business from those same referral sources.
Yeah, we often do. Though I think we forget sometimes, or I think as lawyers, a lot of times people forget in general that we're just happy not to do it and to have someone to send this person to who we know will answer the phone, treat them well, give them
Right. They're getting their problem
what they
taken
need.
care of.
Yeah. Yeah. Colin's
Can
laughing
we,
because this is like the funny part is like the biggest hurdle is like, will you answer the phone and return
right.
my phone call?
Well, as we showed in the legal trends report last year, that's actually a depressingly low number. Law firms are not responsive enough by and large. And yeah, just having a reliable referral source is, or somebody you can refer business to is harder than you think it might be. Let's shift our discussion to COVID-19 and some of the specific impacts that COVID-19 has had on your firm. As we opened the discussion, Colin, you made a comment that this is kind of the reality that you were maybe unintentionally building for, and it feels to me in a lot of ways the future has just arrived early. What we thought might eventually happen, like Zoom becoming a mainstream tool that the average lawyer and the average consumer would be able to plug into with almost no effort, is here, maybe years or even a decade or more ahead of when we thought that might have happened. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been over COVID-19 and how your practices maybe changed or adapted, or as the case might be, maybe stayed exactly the same?
Yeah, I mean, we've switched everything over now to it's a Zoom call, video conference, or phone call. That's the primary option. And before, we were always we were suggesting to people like, you don't have to drive an hour into town and deal with parking. We could just do this, and nobody really seemed open to it.
So I'm curious, Colin, just on that point, Shreya mentioned that you did kind of like a data-driven analysis of how many people wanted to come in for those in-person meetings. What kind of mix did you see when you suggested to a client, hey, we could do this just as easily over a Zoom call? What percentage kind of went on to insist, no, I'd rather meet you in person?
I think it was probably 10% before were by video, and the other ones wanted to come in and at least meet you in person, make sure you're a real person. Yeah.
And then any ongoing meetings after that, they were fine with virtual meetings. Yeah.
Interesting. So
and
that first meeting, you saw 90% of folks say, I want at least the first meeting in person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At least on my end of things, the business
side, it was different. So my business clients did not care. Some of them, I've never even seen them. They don't even want to do a video conference. They would rather just be on the phone. But on the asset protection side, people wanted that first meeting to be in person oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're seeing that number flipped, I would say. 90% are fine with video conference, and 10% are still insisting on like some sort of in-person interaction.
Now that we're opening up, I've been hoping that it's gonna remain that way. I know we've certainly got some people that are insisting that they want to meet in person, but we've also laid out the expectations of our smoothest process is to do this by video. So if you want to meet in person, we can accommodate that, but it might
delay things for you. And so I think that's been like some of the changes you were asking about, changes we've made. I think that's been some of the changes we've made, our communications. So meeting reminders and all of that. And also just like the booking process of like, you're booking this meeting. We've changed everything to be default virtual, and kind of making it more difficult for people to book something in person, to discourage that.
I'm curious, when you see people insisting almost on that first in-person meeting, is it just to get that human connection or do their due diligence and make sure you're real and have a real
Yeah.
office? Tell us
I think
more
so,
about that.
because it's the people who are insisting on that as well have found us just by Googling or searching. You know,
Yeah.
if somebody came to us by a referral, they've already got that trust built up. But if they just, you know, somebody told them to look into asset protection and they typed asset protection, you know, then they're calling us. And, you know, if they're going to make a significant investment into some asset protection planning, you know, they want to come by, make sure we're real, maybe, you know, check our discipline history if we have a discipline history, do a background check, that sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
And if we look ahead to how client expectations are maybe going to be permanently shifted, or how they might evolve beyond the immediate COVID-19 crisis, do you have any forecasts or any projections of where you think things might be headed?
Well, I think for us in Washington, at least on the estate planning side, things are going to get easier in October. At that point, people will be able to electronically notarize documents and notarize them remotely.
Mm-hmm.
So the you know, the need to sign something in person in front of a notary is going to go away. So that will certainly be more helpful. They let us do it for a moment, and you know, during the bigger lockdown, but now they've said no, we've got to go back to in person.
And will that apply
Yeah.
to documents like wills as well?
Though, except for the will, it's
Yeah.
everything but the will.
Because
Everything
the
but the
will
will.
has to
Okay.
be witnessed as
Right.
well. And so your people are being exposed to other folks outside of their bubble regardless, which I have a whole rant about, but you know, that's that can be for a different time. But I think client expectations are going to include being able to request some sort of virtual or remote meeting
Mm-hmm.
from here on out. I think especially people are predicting this is just going to be in waves, the lockdowns. It's
Yeah.
not going to be that all of a sudden things are opened up and it's fine. But I think people are also getting comfortable with the idea of doing some sort of video conference or virtual meeting. And
Absolutely.
so I think they're going to expect that I don't want to drive 45 minutes and pay for parking and spend an hour meeting and then 45 minutes back. I want to be able to do this at my convenience from my home or from wherever I work. And so I think that's going to play a bigger role in people's expectations of when they're interacting with attorneys as well. And taking and making use of things like online file storage and DocuSign and things like that. I think people are more comfortable with it now and will kind of insist on it in many ways.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think what was maybe forward looking, 4 months ago in terms of the technologies a firm might employ to deliver its legal
Mhm.
services are becoming table stakes going forward.
Yeah.
I hired an attorney late last year for a traffic ticket, which was completely innocent. But so I hired an attorney to handle the matter, and I got a referral for one person, and I had assistant at the time had called to just get some more information. And they said, well, he is going to have to call himself, and we only take check. You got to mail that in.
Right.
All this stuff. And then I looked around for the guy who had all the great reviews online. I was able to hire him, pay him online. I never had to talk with anyone. I got email updates, and it was the smoothest thing ever. And
Yeah. That's the new reality, finding people online,
Yeah.
and the expectation that you can do everything online and that you can do it asynchronously as well through email or text message, and not have to have a in-person meeting or a big phone call. At least for some types of cases, that's the new client expectation.
I mean, even with some of our asset protection and estate planning clients, which some of them are larger matters for our firm, people are happy to communicate via text. That's how they would like to be reminded of things. And I'm talking across age groups, like not just someone who's a millennial, right? So these are people who are our age. There are people who are in the baby boomer age range. Like they would prefer to be texted and communicated with in other ways other than just phone calls.
Absolutely. So Shreya and Colin, maybe as a parting bit of advice for any members of our audience that are looking to start their own firm. You've gone through the journey, you've gone all the way from reality and staring the blank canvas of a business card in the face to finding some really great product market fit and finding an audience for your legal services and the way you deliver those legal services. What are some parting words of advice for anyone that is maybe thinking about taking that plunge?
Yeah, for me, I would say to embrace being a business owner over being a lawyer. So if you're starting a law firm, you have to learn the business side of things if you're going to be successful, in my opinion. At least it'll make your life a lot easier and better to do that. And so that would definitely be my advice, is like learn about marketing, finance, and how to control those things.
Yeah, and on the marketing side, my tip for people is trying to be the best lawyer is not going to bring in clients, especially in these times. The defining on who is the best and the greatest is not an action, a plan that's going to bring in clients. And the easiest, I think, approach to marketing is to just talk about your own story, talk about your journey. That's usually the easiest things people can talk about if they want to talk about themselves. And then clients will see overlap. They'll see the emotional overlap, the problem overlap. And, it's something that anyone can talk about, and somebody out there in the world is going to resonate with that and want to hire you as their attorney.
Yeah, not everyone will, but enough will that you'll be able to build a business. So,
well, I think that's some great parting advice and a message that I think ties in so nicely with some of the discussions we've had over the last few weeks as well, just around being, more real and the idea that clients don't necessarily need the best lawyer on the planet for their particular legal matter. And furthermore, how you even define best is a moving target. Compared to what? Exactly. They want somebody who can solve their technical problem, be proficient at solving their legal problem. But everything that wraps around that is actually the more important part, and where you guys have done, I think, an amazing job of innovating and doing something really great. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you joining us, and thank you for a great discussion.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Tying it together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast.